So I had to say at the annual parish meeting, I've tried to recruit a chairman of the camp committee. It hasn't worked. And so this is January, but as far as I can say now, in June, we will not have a summer camp program. And that would have been probably in the 45th year or 44th year or something like that. Because now it's 53 or 4 right now. So that it started. It was kept going before you got here. Before you got here. And after the summer camp, after the annual parish meeting, someone came up and said, "Well, you need to go talk to Jane Smith." And I said, "Okay." So Jane had not been to the parish in this iteration of her life for a month, and she was sitting back in the corner of the Newton room, and so I walked over, and she said, and I didn't know Jane from Eve, and she said, "Well, I'll be the chairman of the camp." And I thought, well, who are you? Do you know anything about running a camp? Well, that's how little I knew about Jane Smith. So that began a great friendship and a great ministry together. So I don't know what my face looked like in the annual parish meeting, but it was horrific to think that there was going to be no summer camp. But I talked to the wardens. I don't know who the warden at the time, but I knew that I was not going to be the director of the summer camp. And so if nobody else was, then there wasn't going to be a summer camp. And so this must have now been 7 or 8 years ago. For a long time, then Jane continued as the camp director, was flourishing into its now 50 plus year. So I'm so thankful that that was a 4-minute episode in 7 years, but the fact that Jane said we will continue having camp is a great memory of mine of the parish. The second one was when, and Michael talked briefly about our daughter parish across town, was when St. Paul's and Christ Church got together to apply for the $100,000 grant to Episcopal Charities to launch a program to help offenders leave prison and re-enter civil society. And we took a big risk asking, daring to think we could do that, daring to think that we could write a proposal in about 3 days, but we did, and we got it. And so for many years we had this program. As things do, it grew and fell and grew and fell, and finally it did in fact come to an end. But the fact that for 3 or 4 or 5 years the Episcopal churches in Poughkeepsie together were doing what we could to help offenders walk out of jail at midnight with a bus ticket and nothing else in their pocket, and come home and have the hope that maybe they could find, this was a conversation we had many times, no, we don't have apartments for you to move into. No, we don't have a job to give you. But we could try to give them hope that there was housing there was a possibility of jobs, particularly if you came and let us work with you on your resume and helped you get dressed better maybe, and help you get a car drive to an interview. And do I wish that was going on 50 years in the future? Without a doubt. But it was given a good shot those years that we did it, and I'm thankful we had the nerve to imagine we could do it, and then that we had the will to do it for as long as we did. And when Episcopal Charities wasn't there handing out $100,000 checks anymore, it got harder to do. So that was too bad. The low point for me, I think, was when, as I referred to a while ago, when one of the hurricanes came up the Hudson River, which coming from the Gulf Coast, I never thought I'd have a hurricane in the middle of New York. So when the hurricane came up and the ground flooded and the underground pipes were clogged and the basement flooded the day before Sunday school started, after we'd been out of that space for 18 months, no coffee hour those years, Sunday school was upstairs. We were so happy to get that space, and Celia came up one day and said, "There's something not smelling good downstairs. This was like 3 or 4 days after the flood. And I called, I went down and was like, oh my God. So I called Enrique, our contract, and I said, there's something, we got to look under this floor. He said, that floor, you don't know. I said, either you bring your, a saw to open up a trap in it, or I'm going to do it with the crowbar. But we got looking, there's something not right. So he came with this huge saw and cut it open, and we looked down at 8 inches of water under the entire basement that we had just refinished. So that was just awful. Of course, church insurance is a wonderful thing, and you're still paying your premium, I hope. Yes. And it's all got fixed again, and it's great, and it's all good. But to live through all those renovations that we, of course, we could plan on the roof falling in, but all those renovations, and thinking we were done, and then find not only was the building out, but then all these, some of who are you, wonderful volunteers with Christian Ed, that we lost the space again for another school year. It was just awful. But we got through it, it got fixed. And that's a testimony again to the work that we all did with the Holy Ghost here in the state. So I would admit to a low point, but we'll hopefully that will never happen on your watch.
10 years, it's hard to pick out one high point. When Sunday fell on December 12th one year, we had 485 Hispanic people here celebrating Guadalupe Day. I could do that one. I could talk about the day that, and I don't remember the last name, but Bill, who wrote the grant to the Department of Parks, Recreation, and yeah. So we got the $375,000 grant. That money, along with I believe the Noon Fund, Noon Trust in Poughkeepsie, we were able to redo the tower. That was a high point. Baptizing triplets one Sunday was a high point for me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remember of not maybe a high point, but a memorable point at Christ Church. And it happened on Christmas Eve, maybe the first Christmas Eve I was here. The pulpit used to be where the font is now, and I can remember, the choir was in great form and sounded wonderful as it always does, and the room was packed with people on Christmas Eve, and I'm in the pulpit preaching the sermon, and suddenly the congregation reacted in a way that they never reacted to any sermon I preached. Then, before or since, I'm preaching along, to Hibbity and Mary and Jim, the baby and everything, and people went, oh! It was interesting. I continued, I kept preaching for a little more, talking about the wonderful incarnation, and again the congregation goes, oh! So after a couple of those, maybe there was a third one, I can't remember. But I finished the sermon and went on with the service and had communion and stuff. And afterwards, people came up to me and they said, did you see what happened? I said, no. What do you mean? I was paying attention to preaching my sermon, my notes and stuff. And they said, well, while you were preaching in the pulpit, a bat was dive bombing and it would come close to the top of your head. And the congregation went, Now, Elliot Lindsley, who some of you may know, was here that night. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, that bat was the ghost of Alexander Griswold Cummings. Because you used the M word. That's what do you mean? Well, you called it midnight mass. Dr. Cummings would not have been happy with that. So he was here to punish you. And I never used the N word again. And if you notice, I changed what I called Christmas Eve service. So that was maybe the high point, but certainly a memorable, an unusual point in my 30-plus years of ministry and preaching. The low point was real simple. The day I left for New York.
Thanks, Michael. Quickly, 4 high points and 1 low point. 3 or 4 weeks after I arrived in town, I had a 10:30 appointment with Margaret Capers. Some of you may remember her. I had a 10:30 appointment with Margaret to bring communion. So off I went. Did a little communion, cordial greeting, little communion service, and then she looked at me and said, "Well, thank you, David. Do you drink bourbon?" Yes. Great, let's have a double to celebrate your arrival. So when I wasn't drinking bourbon, a lot of my ministry outside the parish had me walking on Main Street. There were just more vagrants than usual. And there were more homeless people than usual. And so a few of us in the parish, it was a time when churches were opening homeless shelters. So a few of us in the congregation said, well, we really ought to bring homeless people into Christ Church. It's getting to be winter, so you know the drill. A very heated vestry meeting ensued. There were two very heated vestry meetings ensued, and a secret meeting with the city manager, Bill Tyson. The vestry was divided. Yeah, we ought to do it. It's a great idea. It's ours. No, we've got a magnificent building, and how are we ever going to protect this great resource? We're really stuck, but divided, and we're about to go forward, divided as we were. And Bob Raymond was on the vestry, and Bob said, "This is a terrible idea. I would never vote for this. I'll vote against it if it comes to a divided vote, but instead, I will be the brass knuckles for Christ Church vestry for the homeless shelter. You can start it here, and I'll make damn well sure that we're protected." Well, Bob Raymond went on to become the greatest advocate in this parish for homeless shelter and homeless housing in Dutchess County. At one point, we blessed him and his bicycle right here as he left for across-the-country fundraising mission for the homeless shelter. And the shelter, because of Bob, moved from Christ Church to a permanent home with Dutchess, Council on Housing, one of those organizations. So that was a real high point. Man, someone who was so loyal to this parish and so loyal to how he understood God, to take that step. Third high point. I was walking on Main Street, and you know, Main Street in 1987, there weren't any Spanish-speaking people on Main Street. And I noticed that there seemed to be 10 or 20, or maybe 25, and they were all male. And they looked like workers, but they looked like they were in tough shape. And so a few of us thought, well, maybe if we're only seeing males, maybe they're undocumented. At the time, I wasn't as politically astute. Maybe they're aliens, I think is what I said. And if they're aliens, then the women and children might be staying inside to be protected. So we put up some posters, and I didn't speak Spanish, but we put up some posters on storefront windows and telephone poles and invited people to a meeting here, Spanish speakers. And that turned into another meeting, and then there was a meeting with some prayers and worship, and it turned into this Spanish congregation, Spanish-speaking congregation. It ran for about 8 months. I got a phone call. It was the Archdeacon for Hispanic, at the time, the Archdeacon for Hispanic Ministries in the diocese. You can't do this. It's not approved. What do you mean? Well, you know, we have a Hispanic commission, and it's got to be approved. And we need to know that there's a real need there and interest on the part of the parish. And you got to stop. So I said, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to continue on. I wasn't quite that way. And then Enrique called back and he said, this is an official request for a meeting with you and your vestry. Enrique came and he just laid us out in lavender. It was just like we were the worst thing possible. And all we're doing is providing a space for people to worship. And he said, you got to stop. And the high point was every single member of the vestry said, you got to be kidding. We're going on. I never heard another word from the diocese about it. I never heard another word from the missioner for Hispanic ministry. The diocese at some point has helped to fund the ministry. So the real high point is you know, that leadership that knows how and when to fight for something fiercely. Really great. Fourth high point, John Clark. You remember him? John Clark walked in my office and said, David, do you really believe what you say up there on Sunday? I'm 35 years old, maybe a little insecure, and, in this wonderful parish. What do I say? Well, John, I don't know. It's nuanced. He said, no, you don't believe it, and nobody else believes it either. Nobody else believes. Nobody in the congregation believes what they're saying, because they're not thinking about it. What do you mean, John? He said, footnotes. When someone says something like creed, they don't believe what's written on the page. They say, we believe in God. And there's a big footnote in their mind. And the footnote leads to this whole body of information and understanding in them that says, by God, I mean, ... And when you get to the phrase Almighty, another footnote, by Almighty. And he said, your job is to help yourself and the congregation together to unpack all of those footnotes so that there's a way to express what we really do believe. Just a brilliant high point, a low point. Some of you will remember this. Kay Pearson, she's a great musician, and she probably had some inklings of wanting a little more formal worship than I, with my Protestant background, was really ready for. But she said, John used to sing part of the Mass. And, oh, you can do it, David. Well, I knew this was like a really bad idea. But I said, okay. So I practiced with Kay here. It was rough. But she said, no, you're ready. Well, I knew, this was for All Saints Day. I knew about 4 notes into the liturgy. This was the most embarrassing thing. I stopped singing, and thank God you kept coming.
I thought I knew what I was going to say, because some of those of us who were here last night found out that we were going to be asked this question. But as I listened to my compatriots up here, I realized that two things. One is that high points tend not to be so much moments as long, extended processes. And the other thing is that they inevitably are attached to individuals, and I think that's part of the reality that we're all sort of talking about here. I have to tell you that I have a recurring dream that I've had as recently as just a few months ago, that I'm back as rector of Christ Church. And I'm really embarrassed to tell this to Susan and these other people who followed me. The interesting thing is that it's been a recurring dream that I've had for the last, when did I leave? In 1984. I have several times a year, and the content has never been the same. Sometimes I'm staying in the rectory, and somebody says, well, why don't you just stay and we'll tell the rector that we've got a new one. And I'm happy to tell you that the person that I'm replacing is never anybody that I saw. It's an anonymous rector. But usually at the end of the dream, I decide, oh no, but if I do that, I can't go back to California. So I really need to go back to where I belong. So you can read the side. But why is that? It's because of the incredible number of those moments that have locked us into this place and this community. My favorite Margaret Caker story was in Bible study, and Margaret was past 90, and we were doing the Abraham and Sarah story. And we were reading a lot. People took turns reading, and we got to the point where, and Sarah was pregnant and is giving birth to Isaac, and suddenly this wonderful Kentucky accent says, "That's the most awful story I ever heard in my life." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I don't want to have another child." What I thought I was going to talk about was having the opportunity to be in at not quite the beginning, but certainly still the very earliest time of the Christ Church Summer Program. Because that program, which had actually been an undertaking of my boss, Reese Williams, and more specifically of my immediate predecessor as the assistant, whose name was Ed Schmidt, whom some of you may remember, but it had only just gotten started when I came, and so really my first serious job at Christ Church was taking the summer program and getting it up and running about 2 weeks after I got here. Fortunately, Reese had done all the preliminaries, but that program, which has become so much a part of your life over these years, at the time was not just innovative and creative, it was, in some people's minds, it was almost dangerous. Because what it said was that this church is connected to out there. And that was an idea that Episcopalians didn't always have in the 1950s and the 1960s. And it was the visionary leadership of Reese Williams and a number of people who were on the vestry at that time who said, you know, we have watched downtown Poughkeepsie go from being a very elegant neighborhood to being a slum, which it was in the 1960s. And we, as Christians, cannot come to church here, drive in, park our cars, come to church, and go home and ignore what's going on around us. Those of you who are of a certain age like me will remember that the 1960s were not easy years. They were not easy years for the church. They were not easy years for American society. This country, as polarized as it is today, was every bit as polarized in the 1960s. And this community and this parish were horribly polarized. People didn't speak to each other across the central aisle. They didn't give each other the peace. And Christ Church knew that, and obviously the easy thing to have done would have been to say, okay, well, this is just too controversial, this is too dangerous, we're just not going to do it. We thought it was a good idea, but we're going to pull back in. Christ Church never did that. Christ Church hired me right out of seminary, and of course, as the young assistant always is, I was given responsibility for the youth group. In the late 1960s, this country was in a terrible war that most young people hated, and which I was so much opposed to, and that Christ Church youth group, and I'm seeing Sarah Phillips as I talk, because she was part of that youth group. We said we have to not sit in our youth group meeting and not do anything. And Reese Williams, and we went to Reese Williams and we said there are young people, hundreds and hundreds of young people in Poughkeepsie who are passionate about saying what they think about this terrible war that's killing their friends from high school and from college. And this church needs to do something. And Reese Williams said, what do you want to do? And we said, we want to have a 36-hour vigil on the Christ Church steps and read the names of all the young people who have been killed in the Vietnam War. And Reese said, go do it. And we did it. And that was not what most churches were doing in 1967 and 1968. But it's what Christ Church was doing. And whatever you think about that war, and whatever hindsight tells us about that war, and whatever you think about other issues that have shaken the church and shaken the world, certainly part of the warp and woof of this parish is that we belong to the world, and we have to be engaged in it, and we have to pay attention to it, because if we don't, we're not being faithful. And so for me, that decades-long process that had started before I came and that went right on, and that my colleagues up here have been talking about, still goes on. And that's why some of us think that this really is our parish. One quick down moment, and this was a moment, was 3 o'clock in the morning when Harvey Flagg finally is able to track me down and tell me that the parish house is in flames. One thing about the master bedroom in the rectory is that you really don't hear anything outside your windows. But once you find out that your parish house is on fire, you wake up really fast. And that happened on a weekend, and on Sunday morning, we got the idea from Coventry Cathedral in England, but we took 2 charred beams from that terrible fire and put them behind the altar. And as horrible as that whole episode was, it animated this parish because we said, we're down, but we're not out. And all the way, if you look at the buildings today, if you look at the parish house and all the changes that have been made, they all started that night at 3 o'clock in the morning when the parish house was, and I don't mean it was smoldering, I mean the flames were 100 feet up into the air. And so that could have been a terrible kind of letting the air out of this place, and it wasn't. It was simply one more time when Christ Church said, yeah, that's really awful. Now what are we going to do about it?
I had several more questions lined up, but at the speed we're going, we'd be here right through the clam bake. So I want to just scrap my questions because I want you to have a chance to ask your questions. And it would be helpful if a question is directed to a particular rector, although if your question is broad and it needs to be addressed to all of them, you can indicate that as well. But let's get started on your question. Mary.
want to pick up on something that John